Hello, and let's talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech to the country on COVID-19 and the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Modi is scheduled to deliver an address on the steps to combat coronavirus, and there's already a lot of speculation regarding what he'll say. The coming days will be crucial in India's efforts to combat the pandemic, with the official stance still being that the disease has not reached the stage of community spread yet. There are multiple issues here. With various scenarios calling for a shutdown, how will the country manage? A shutdown will not be easy to implement in India. Then there is a question of millions of workers in the informal sector and daily wagers whose livelihoods will be in jeopardy. Will the government take assertive steps to ensure that the quarantine does not lead to a socio-economic crisis? We'll discuss this, but here are some details of the situation globally and in India. According to the Johns Hopkins University tracker, the number of cases has crossed 218,000 and the number of deaths has crossed 8,800. Italy continued to suffer with a staggering 475 deaths on Wednesday. In positive news, China has recorded no new domestic cases for the first time. In India, the number of active cases has crossed 150. Maharashtra has the highest number of cases at 45. According to the ICMR, the disease is still in local transmission stage and has not reached community transmission. Major steps are being taken across the country to prevent the spread. Over 150 trains have been cancelled, as have the CBSE and ICSE board exams and the JEE main exams for the IITs and engineering colleges. Some states have also imposed Section 144. A key question in people's minds is the economic impact. The International Labour Organization has said that over 25 million jobs could be lost globally due to the impact of the crisis. In India, the GDP growth is expected to fall, though by how much is still uncertain. A few days ago, the finance minister said that the government was still analysing the impact. More significantly, the question is how will the government ameliorate the impact on the most vulnerable sections of the society? Reuters has quoted government sources as saying that it is planning a 120 billion rupee rescue package for the aviation sector. Meanwhile, the Kerala government has announced that a 1-month relaxation will be given to all customers in the state for paying electricity bills. Opposition parties and people's movements have also made a number of demands. A key aspect is healthcare spending, which is now only around 1.5% of the GDP. The crisis calls for an immediate and major increase in building infrastructure and hiring more medical staff. The CPIM has demanded the release of increased allocation of food grains to the states free of cost, so as to start a program of making free rations available to unorganized workers and migrant workers. 7.5 crore tons are reported to be in the godowns. The party has also asked the government to defer the census operation and abandon the National Population Register project and focus all its efforts on dealing with the pandemic. We talked to senior journalist Aunindyo Chakravarty on what Modi might say today and what should be done. Here is what he had to say. Thank you, Aunindyo, for joining us. So we know that the Prime Minister is scheduled to address the country in the evening today, and it's a bit of a joke on the internet that anytime he decides to do that, people sort of freak out. But jokes aside, it's a very serious situation. We've seen shutdowns of various intensities across the world. We've seen various models of leadership also, some of denial, some of late response, even though it's aggressive. So keeping all this in mind, what do you think should be the top priority for the Prime Minister when he speaks to the country today?
Well, I would say the top priority has to be a shutdown, but it has a lot of repercussions. Because we know that places where, let's take the case of Italy, for instance, where a shutdown has been in place now for, I would say, 5-6 days, a complete shutdown. Italians were apparently not following requests, and now it's been put in place. And if you say the new cases, right, the additional cases every day, that seems to have plateaued. It's not increasing anymore, which is the fear. I mean, if you have 10,000 cases a day, it's not really that much of a concern. I mean, 2,000 cases a day, every day, it's not that much of a concern because after a point, it will stop expanding. But if you have 2,000 today, 4,000 tomorrow, 10,000 in a week, then that's the problem. So we're seeing Italy, it started plateauing. So shutdowns do work. We know it worked in China, in Wuhan and Hubei, and then it didn't spread beyond that. So I guess that has to be the top priority for the Prime Minister as well.
Right. So, but the key question is also that suppose, the center and the states do move to some form of shutdown, the economic impact that we're going to see is considerable. And I think various countries across the world it's been coming out in various ways. The problems, say, migrant workers are facing, the problem precarious workers, those in the delivery sector. Very good example that affects many of us, for instance, is for Facebook algorithms, for instance. once the manual operators have left, the manual reviewers have left, the kind of chaos that has been happening. Amazon workers, for instance, and corporations have also responded often in heartless ways. So, based on the global response from governments on this issue, what do you think is the sort of model that India needs to follow?
I don't think India can follow any global model for various reasons. Number one, if you look at countries which have a big population like India, China, I would imagine most cities would have complete running water. India doesn't have it. We know that in a city like Delhi, even in 2016, I know things have changed after the AAP government because they focused on water supply, but I know for a fact that my own driver, he doesn't get running water in his house. So even if I tell him to keep washing his hands, he's not going to be able to do it, right? We know that when we talk about social distancing, WHO says that you should not be within 1 meter of another person, which is 3 and 1/3 feet, and ideally 2 feet, 6 feet. Now, just imagine, do we have that 6 feet? Many of the small houses, the hovels in slums are probably 6 feet, 8 feet wide, within which you'll find an old person to a family of 5, 6 people living in that. So to maintain social distancing is impossible within the house and impossible with your neighbor in a slum and absolutely impossible. And so India cannot really tell people, sit at home, you can't do, and I was reading a NewsClick piece recently in which they said that only 45% of Indian regular workers, people who are salaried, get paid leave or medical leave. So 55% do not get it, and regular workers itself is less than a quarter, about 23% of all workers. So 77% of workers have to go out and work, take out maybe 7-8% out of that who probably have enough money not to have to work. They can sit at home, but others have to go out. So India needs to keep all these things in mind when it puts a shutdown in place.
Right. So in terms of concrete steps, what would be, say, a policy prescription that you would think of, especially with the economy? There's, of course, the question of how much the GDP growth will be affected. Numbers are already coming out. It could be 0.5%, it could be 1%, it could be more. But that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is also, of course, in terms of the day-to-day survival of people itself. So what kind of steps can the government take to assure that?
So Prashant, we know that, Ranlan looks at GDP numbers. We've had very good GDP growth compared to the rest of the world now for 15 years, right? Maybe 20 years. We crib when it's 5%. We said that's terrible. Many countries would love to have that. The truth is that makes no difference to about 70% of Indians. So you can have as much GDP growth as you want, it doesn't make a difference. Similarly, GDP decline, if poor people are given money, poor people are given resources, a decline in GDP, frankly, I don't care. It might affect you and me. Of course, it will affect you and me. But the long-term impact is not going to be that bad. I would say that the government has to use things like Jan Dhan accounts that they have opened for so many people. There are ways to hand over cash to people, hand over food to people. We know in Kerala, midday meals are being supplied to people at home because a lot of people send their kids to school because of those midday meals, right? So Kerala is giving pulses, eggs, rice, vegetables, banana, milk to homes in parcels. The Delhi government has a system now to do doorstep delivery of ration. The midday meal is already an expenditure that's budgeted for. If you shut down schools, that money you have. So it's not that big a problem. Handing over cash. Let's say that you have to shut down, not everything, but areas where there has been some presence of COVID-19. Like let's say a ward boy who works in a hospital in Bombay lives in a slum or a tenement quarter, that place has to be shut down, right? Because there is contact. So the entire place has to be shut down. If that is there, then you need to be able to hand money to people. I know it is easier said than done, but there is no reason why it shouldn't be tried. And let's say you have to give it to 1% of India's population, right? Now 1% of the households. That you pay 10,000 rupees over the next 1.5 months, 6 weeks or 4 weeks that you want people to stay at home. It's 3,000 crore rupees. right? You give it to 5%, it's 15,000 crore rupees. How much is that of the GDP? 0.07%, but it has a huge multiplier because people will have that money. They'll not be able to go out, so they're not going to be spending it immediately, obviously, right? But that money will stay with them, it will be saved, and when they're able to go out, there's a pent-up demand which will be unleashed in the economy. So there is a multiplier effect of that. The government has to spend at this moment, and as we discussed last time, the advantage that governments have across the world right now is that rating agencies will not frown upon you if you give fiscal measures. We know the home of capitalism, finance capital, the US, they're going to hand out money to people. Trump is trying to get that done. So the first thing, people can't wash hands, so the government has to procure huge amounts of hand sanitizer liquids, right? These are not fancy bottles with perfumed and with color. They have to be good quality with 70% or more alcohol content. They should be given in large bottles from one house to the other in slums, so that people who don't have water can use it to sanitize their hands. It is better than not having anything. I know it's only 66% effective, but it's still better than doing nothing. You need to go and tell people in each house that do this, do not do that. You need to use Doordarshan and your entire network to constantly talk about what has to be done. So I think that there are many things that can be done. The three things: distribute hand sanitizers, purchase it in bulk, government can procure it, government companies can be asked to produce it. There are hundreds and hundreds of alcohol makers in India. They need to produce higher level alcohol, which they, and denature it. So they can do it. It's not that big a problem.
So the other key question at this point also is that alongside, say, the steps being taken by the executive, there's also a need to build a very community-based approach to handling the disease, and so that it also not take a turn where human rights are curbed, or those in vulnerable situations are stigmatized, or they suffer. That also in some ways the media has the freedom to report what exactly is happening, shine a light on, say, mistakes that are being made so that they're corrected immediately, even while making sure that there is no panic being spread.
Absolutely. I think the media has to play an important positive role in not creating panic, not promoting fake science, not saying that you should drink a lot of hot water when WHO is saying that is rubbish. So some people, they have to say, okay, here is some traditional methods used to boost your immunity. Will that work against your virus? We don't know, but you can do it. But don't spread non-scientific information on TV. Number one, don't scare people, obviously, right? Don't also say, oh, everything is fine. So when you curb media freedom, which to a certain extent I think is taking place at the moment, you have the problem of not having enough transparency. India has to test a lot. It has to be open to admit that there are cases, there is community transmission taking place. It has to procure stuff very quickly and act on it very fast. So that's the main thing. I know people are saying that private labs should give it for free. I think that's what the request was made, that private labs, why don't you test it for free? They can't. They don't have the money. I mean, look at what has been happening to India's economy for the past 4 or 5 years. You can't expect companies to pitch in right now. The government is the only thing that can be done. Community things, especially for middle class, right, is very important. RWAs, which are ubiquitous in India, resident welfare associations, they must play a role in spreading the right information, also telling people what to do, what not to do, helping old people, helping with communicating with official health channels. That is an important thing that must happen.
And also definitely against any Gaumutra treatment for the disease or prevention.
One person supposedly has fallen sick by drinking it.
Exactly.
Again, I'm saying that you want to do that, you do it at your home. Maybe you've done it traditionally. I don't know. No one stopped Morarji Desai from doing what he did for so many years. You want to do it. But I would say that it should obviously not be promoted, and definitely government health agencies should definitely step up and say that don't do it. Don't try to spread information which does not have any scientific basis. I know a lot of people will tell you, oh, it has been patented in the US. I mean, you can do patent anything in the US, right? It does not mean that anyone's trying to say that this is medicine. You can there are US patents for how to swing on a swing, right? So that's patented in the US. So frankly, that means nothing. I know that I think it's called Govt, some thing of the Indian government or associated with the Indian government, which is patented it, and there are papers supposedly in ancient science which claim that Gomutra can cure diabetes and all that. But there is that's all distillate. This is something that people need to understand. These are distillates. This is not, and I'm deliberately saying that what you and I say. Maybe people who watch this video are already there is a confirmation bias there. But what you and I say is not going to change things. People will say that let us all chant Om and stuff like that. That is going to happen. And if it works as a placebo, there's nothing wrong with those things. We know placebo works, right? But don't do dangerous things, obviously. But I doubt that the governments anywhere will stop that. I mean, Chinese herbal medicines have been used, augmenting. This is what the WHO says, to make people feel better with their symptoms because they're used to it, right? Maybe they work. Maybe they're just placebo. We don't know.
Right. Thank you so much, Aunindyo, for talking to us. Our next story is about the UP government's decision to allow the Ram Navami Mela, which is scheduled from March 25th to April 2nd, to continue despite the coronavirus crisis. Now, to talk more about this, we have with us Pranjal. Pranjal, so there is some speculation that there may be another decision on this later in the day. And we do know that the district medical authorities had initially expressed some concern that this is not, organizing an event is not a good idea, especially when usually lakhs of people come. So, what does this signify and symbolize at a time like this?
See, you must say that the statement was made that this time it is different. And you have to understand the significance of this statement, because if you look at who is leading this entire Mela procession, this has been happening for ages, for many decades now. This is being led by the trust which has been formed to basically look after the construction of the Ram temple.
Right.
And this is happening for first time after the judgment has come on Ayodhya vis-a-vis building temple on the disputed site. So that's why they're saying that this time it's different, because they're trying to basically project that, okay, the temple construction will now start, and hence this is the first, Ram Navami technically is the birth anniversary of Ram. So that's why this Mela holds an important event, is an important event for the incumbent BJP government there. Why is it being held despite the fact that UP government itself has issued notices about shutting down of schools, ensuring social distances and all? It can also be a tool for now to begin the polarization process for Uttar Pradesh, which is anyway due for elections in next 2 years.
Right.
So one, there's an assertion of, okay, we had said that the temple will be constructed and hence this is happening. And second, it can also be a ground for starting basically to take this forward and build it as a narrative in entire Uttar Pradesh.
Right. And this also comes in the aftermath of the way the government has responded to the CAA protests.
Right.
The hoardings, for instance, recently.
Right.
And a very aggressive posture it is trying to convey to the people, both in India, both in UP and in India.
Right, definitely. I mean, there has been a clear contradiction that way, even vis-a-vis the stand of the central government and the UP government, especially when it comes to this entire coronavirus threat. That on one hand, you have the health minister of the country doing press conference and saying that social distancing is important. Important steps are being taken throughout the states, while the UP government is doing this because they want to assert their ideology more strongly. And this is, you're absolutely right that this is coming after what has been done vis-a-vis protesters in Uttar Pradesh. So the message is very clear that we're not going to back down from our ideology, we're not going to back down from the politics that we hold and the narrative and polarization that we want to ensure in the society, whatever happens. What threat it poses, I think we don't need to talk about it, because the numbers could be anywhere between 5 lakh to 10 lakh people, which is close to 1 million people. And if so many people assemble at a place and Prashant, Ayodhya is a small city. comes under the Faizabad district. Faizabad district itself is a small district in that terms, and they really don't have the facilities to accommodate if something happens
Right.
so many people at one go. It's not just that. Even if you assume the minimum numbers and say 1 lakh people turn up, and something happens, they are going to go back to their families.
Exactly.
They're going to take public transport and go to different areas. What is going to happen after that?
And it's interesting because in Malaysia,
Right.
the spread or a massive amount of spread in Southeast Asia is believed to have started from one similar religious gathering.
Right, right.
So-
So that is there. Hopefully, the Prime Minister Modi is supposed to announce, talk to the nation in the evening around 8 o'clock. Hopefully, the sense will prevail and the central government will issue directory. But then it might again turn out to be another tough war between a strong right-wing line within the BJP, which is being led by the Adityanath government, and so-called moderate phase as they want to project, which is, we don't need to tell who is leading it.
Strange times.
Strange times.
Thank you so much, Pranjal. That's all we have today in this episode of Let's Talk. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. with the major news developments of the day. Until then, keep watching NewsClick.